All right, welcome back to the Ottawa studios of Inside My Canoe Head. I am your host, Dr. D. Today, we're going to talk about debates, why we've lost the art of discourse, and what that means for us being able to solve the big, challenging, difficult collective problems we have in society. So grab yourself your favorite beverage. Let's get at her. So welcome back. Thanks again for joining us, and all the new subscribers. We appreciate you being here. And remember, anything you love, hate, or find yourself violently reacting to with one way or another, reach out to us at jeff@preparednesslabs.ca or drop over to our website, www.insidemycanoehead.ca. Folks, today we have lost the ability to really have a conversation. The old school debates, the classical debate as I call them, and we'll get into the details of those and how I think they need to be reborn a little bit, but this was all born out of a podcast that I watched. If you're not a fan of the Modern Wisdom podcast, its host Chris Williamson is brilliant. He's got over 2.5 million subscribers on YouTube. I don't know how big his show is on the podcast platforms, but he had a fantastic guest on yesterday. And it was Eric Weinstein. And the question in the frame about it is, are we on the brink of a revolution? And I'm really only about halfway through it, but I had to make this podcast episode today, and I wrote something up on LinkedIn about it because it really scored to the point of some of the phrases that he used in there. And I'm going to attribute when I attribute to what was said, it's either going to be Eric Weinstein or Chris Williamson that said it. Sometimes I'll get that backwards, but you know the episode. Go out, find that podcast, listen to it. It's 3.5 hours long, which is why I'm only halfway through it right now. And you think I'm long-winded. But really, it's a great outline of the problems we have in today's current society. Why are we headed towards this incredibly divisive society where everybody is building camps, building defenses, and volleying attacks at each other instead of old-fashioned classical debates where you just had a point to make? And this goes back to Neil Tyson DeGrasse Young. Sorry, I get his name mixed up all the time. Anyhow, he's been on Joe Rogan. He's a great scientist. He's one of the few scientists that really have this gift, and Weinstein's the same as him. The gift, the ability to explain science in simplistic terms. And that doesn't mean the people listening to it are dumb. It's that the people who are ignorant about science. So I'm very ignorant about physics, other than a little bit about light refraction and stuff like that. I don't know anything about physics. I'm not an expert in physics. So I look to people who have the ability to explain physics to me. I'm an intelligent individual. I'm well educated. I just don't know a lot about a lot of things. And that alone, admitting that publicly, is not something that is very popular in today's society. We often think that it is a sign of weakness for us to say, hey, I don't know about that. I don't know about this subject matter. I just got off Zoom, an hour-long conversation with a brilliant individual who's doing some great work on designing HIRA software and HRVA software for emergency management. And he gave me a quick look into some of this, and this stuff is brilliant. And I don't know about software. I'm not a software expert. I don't know what is the right platform on which to build risk management software, right? Not my expertise. There are people, but I was talking to him because my expertise lies in the area of preparedness and community resilience when it comes to identifying strengths and weaknesses that exist within a society that is already present. So think about the neighborhood of the city you in. There's going to be strengths and weaknesses about the community, the social capital, the strength of relationships. How do we identify that, codify it, and put it into the bigger risk management and risk mitigation discussion? Really interesting stuff. So I have an expertise. Him and I were having an hour-long discussion about how that may help him in his area and how we might work together. We're working on a bigger research grant project when it comes to building these software and building database models that will help inform higher as not just what people think, but what the data. So why the idea is that I know what I know, but I also don't know what I don't know. And I'm very comfortable in saying publicly, I don't know. And the idea behind this podcast episode on the Modern Wisdom podcast was that we stopped and lost that ability. And I think one of the great lines that came out of it, and I'm going to paraphrase it, obviously, is that we don't have critics anymore. There are no critics online. What we have are stalkers. We have internet cancel culture, and it's the intent to silence opponents and the absolute need to be proven right, and the lack of acceptance that you may actually, in fact, be wrong, or at least there are some deficiencies in your ideas that need attention. And this is so true, and I wrote about it again on a blog that I put out on LinkedIn this morning, really saying I'm seeing this in the emergency management space, and I'm sure it's present in your space, and it's the idea that, and I bring back Tyson DeGrasse into this DeGrasse-Tyson, sorry, because he's explained it as we used to live in a society where people simply had different ideas, right? The fact that I looked at the American election and thought positive things of Trump and you think negative things of Trump, it was never going to be this fight about I need to prove you right or you need to prove me wrong. It was just this acceptance that people around us have different ideas, have different sets of values. And because my values and beliefs may be different from yours, this is not a question of superiority. This is not an equivalency question. It's not that, because I have a PhD, I'm somehow, my opinion is more important than yours, or that because I'm a professor, my opinion should be exalted to a higher level. This is about that everybody has a difference of opinion. People have ideas and thoughts, and they are free to have those, and it is not our responsibility to absolutely persuade everybody that we are correct and they are wrong. And I wrote about this in the blog, and I really concentrated on the idea that because somebody disagrees with you, that doesn't make them your enemy, and it doesn't make them wrong, because you're not right simply because you think a certain way. And we've lost the ability to debate. Now, any of you who have had the opportunity to watch a monk debate or a formal debate in an academic institution, a lot of the big Ivy League schools in the U.S. and some of them in Canada still hold these formal classical debates, as I call them, where it is appropriate to get dressed in your best attire, and it is a very formal debate, a very formal combat of ideas, intellectual combat, if you will. And it basically resolves around, we determine a question. So it usually goes something on, be it resolved that, be it resolved that Canada does not require a federal emergency management agency in order to solve the current set of conditions in our society, or something akin to that. Somebody would be brought in to speak to the affirmative. In other words, be it resolved and you agree with it. And then somebody would be brought in for the negative, be it resolved and you disagree with that statement. And it's a very formal, and you select people who have the ability to conduct verbal combat without it without it diving down into an accusatorial combat of blaming people and firing, saying, accusations, etc. And basically the way classical debate works is say I'm voting for that. I'm the for. So I get a 5-minute opportunity to speak an opening statement. The negative then gets a 5-minute opening speak. And then I, as the positive, get a 2-minute rebuttal to what they said. And they get a 2-minute rebuttal to what I said. And then it goes into a moderated back and forth discussion and debate about anything that came up. But the idea being is that when I'm speaking my 5-minute opening, you're free to use body language, though generally it's you keep to yourself. But you STFU, right? And this is a huge problem people have nowadays, right? They want to clamor on top of you the second you say something they disagree with. They're after your arse like it's on fire. They are going to try to shut you down. The idea that you would have to sit there and listen to somebody for 5 minutes talk about things from a perspective that you totally disagree with, and then you are going to talk for 5 minutes about things that they totally disagree with, and then you're going to debate them, is very difficult for many people, because somehow, and this is a unapologetically criticism of today's world, we somehow are looking at words as violence. Words are our discourse, right? I say something that you fundamentally disagree with. Those words aren't evil. Those words aren't bad. It's kind of called the generalist idea of free speech, right? That people should be free to say things that I inherently disagree with, and they be given an opportunity and a platform to tell them, right? Because I'm not the arbiter of the truth. I'm not the arbiter of decision as what people can and cannot hear, and I don't think there should be one of those people outside of the judiciary. But setting that aside, the whole idea of being able to have that debate is, think about something, an idea in preparedness or another field that you are very passionate about, right? Think about the Gaza conflict. Think about the American election. Think about the rise of the far right. Think about the rise of the far left. Think about populism on the left. Think about populism on the right. Think about authoritarian versus libertarian. Think about capitalism versus socialism. Like, find something that you are incredibly passionate about and you have a strong set of beliefs on, and then ask yourself, could you conduct yourself appropriately and properly in a classical debate on that subject? And if you cannot, I'm going to suggest, the people are going to run to the comments on this one, I'm going to suggest the problem is you, not the topic. You have to have the emotional intelligence to be able to enter into a debate, sit there, and consider what other people say. Because as we know, listening skills fall into two general categories, right? The old adage that nature or the good Lord, depending on what you believe in, gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, is when you listen to somebody, are you listening to learn and understand, right? Or are you listening to respond? In other words, you're taking apart their arguments and you're figuring out in your head how you're going to launch back at them? Or are you actively listening to what they're saying and understanding that, in fact, they very well may have points that are true, that are accurate, and that may show there's a crack in the foundation of ideas that you have, right? This idea, again, that you have to have the self-belief that I don't know everything about everything. And even where I do have a very strong expertise, there are people who are going to periodically show up and demonstrate that there are cracks in my armor. There are cracks in my position. So I speak at great length about a couple of very important topics to me. And I consider myself to have a pretty good knowledge in those areas, but it's not supreme. I don't have unassailable levels of intelligence when it comes to building community resilience. I know how it works. I know how to improve it, but that doesn't mean I know every way to improve it. It doesn't mean I know every way that contributes to greater community resilience. I know how I currently measure it, and I've built my measurement system based upon research that I've done and amplifying the research that has been done by 70 years of scholars ahead of me. That does not mean I have the definitive final answer. It means I'm in a position to debate and defend the logic schema that I use for those points. Doesn't mean that I cannot accept criticism. And this is something that the podcast guest went on at length about, Eric Weinstein, is that we don't have critics anymore. Right? Critics used to be people who could openly challenge the ideas that are presented in society as a function of a critic, to be able to criticize your work, your thoughts, and your ideas, and it be left at that. And then the individual could counter that criticism with their own point. There would never be the idea of, oh boy, this person disagrees with me, out cancel culture, attacking them, attacking everything they do. And Eric Weinstein, who's a physicist, he talks at length in the interview, and he gives some really interesting insight into the fights that are going on in the science world. He says, for example, he challenges people's knowledge and capability to go forward. And he says this person is not a good scientist for the following reasons. It's his position, right? But then what happens is that scientist doesn't take well to being categorized that way by Mr. Weinstein. So what does he do? Well, this individual, and he doesn't name them, but he talks about a couple of them, have gone to start attack everything. They've sent letters to his employer. He said at one extent, his wife is undergoing her doctorate right now and getting her PhD, right? These people who oppose his views have written to the academic supervisor of his wife, calling out and saying they shouldn't be supporting his wife in her efforts. And so we see this where when cancel culture, for example, and it happened to me once, and I'm going to bring this up because I don't know if the individual remains a listener of this podcast or not, but I brought up an issue once, and I'm going to leave the issue out of it. And the individual went after me, which is fine. I look forward to people who challenge the points of view that I have, and I look forward to the people who challenge the statements I made. But this individual went through all of my business structure. So went after my social media, started posting on different forms of social media, started pulling little things out of context and putting them together. And it was an incessant challenge to me very existing on the internet. And this individual was trying vociferously, and it was incredible the level of effort that they were putting in to make me look dumb because they disagreed with what I was saying. And it got to the point where didn't matter how much I muted, didn't matter how much I blocked, they were finding ways around. I finally got into a reasonable exchange with the individual, and all that they wanted was a public post where I came out and admitted that their points were valid and might show weakness in my points, right? They wanted personal public confirmation that they were right and I was wrong. And when I gave that person, they went away. Now, I don't know where they've gone, and I'm certain they may be back. I don't know. But it's an example of one person who attempted to cancel or totally overcome everything that I was trying to do because they were that opposed to one thing I said that they took it upon as a personal mission to take down me off of the public platforms because of what I was saying. They are real. We don't have critics, or we have critics, but we've lost the ability to accept. When somebody comes onto LinkedIn, and I post 6 days a week on LinkedIn, I put a blog or some news article or something every day, sometimes multiple times a day, I'm posting on LinkedIn. I expect people to challenge them, and there are many people that do, and I ultimately respect these individuals. Absolutely. I've never accused somebody of being an idiot. I've never told them to go read some research before you comment or some ridiculous things like that, because I don't believe these people are in need of an education. I believe these people have a different set of opinion than mine. They've framed and structured it in a certain way to a certain set of life experiences that I don't have exposure to, right? And it's perfectly fine that you and I have a difference of opinion. That's fine. That's actually great because societies foster better. I don't know if I'm a huge fan of the World War Z movie, the apocalypse movie. And there's a one part in there in the city of Jerusalem when the theorist that built the wall talks about being the 10th man. And it says when everybody's in a room and 9 people agree on something to be true and everybody's getting behind it, building a consensus, there always must be the 10th man to oppose it. The 10th man must always, no matter what's going on, offer an alternate point of view and argue against it to prevent the idea of groupthink. And it's an intention. Sometimes you'll find yourself to be that 10th man in the room who's required to do that, right? And this is a very important point because we find a lot in science as we know it is the best ideas of the information as we understand it now, and it is all subject to change. Every science is subject to change. And what we know 10 years from now will not be the same as now. Now, it doesn't mean that right now we have the science wrong. So 10 years, you don't look back and say, okay, in the 2010s, the science on physics was wrong. We've learned new things. No, science has evolved, and as we understand it, new things become real and evident. That doesn't mean the old stuff was bad. It doesn't mean it was malinformed or misinformed. It doesn't mean people had poor intentions, right? The idea that we lack the ability to debate is a huge problem, especially as we go forward in emergency management. Listen, we're talking about a governance function from the public sector and a private sector function, which is built around the idea that we desire to have our society to continue to operate in the face of disruption. And when significant events occur, we would like our society to return to normalcy as soon as possible with the least amount of damage. That is a pretty big, important idea. Now, within that, there are many different ways. Some people are in the camp believe that it is a primary responsibility of government, and it requires government institutions, and it requires significant government funding. There are people that believe it's an individual responsibility, and the balance of work that needs to be done is at the individual and the person level, not the government level, right? Both of those are competing ideas, but neither one of them are incorrect. Having that debate, it's difficult. For example, when I come forward, and I'm not calling for any additional investment in emergency management, I don't think the function needs any further public sector money. I think it is well funded and properly funded. I believe it is disorganized. I believe it is misorganized. I believe the funds are more than sufficient to execute the function. They just happen to be in the wrong place, as well as the human resources. And I put that forward. Some people will disagree with that, and I certainly hope they do, right? And that's the idea about it. But again, I've experienced it personally, and now it's only a singular occasion. Most people I deal with online have the ability to understand that we have a difference of opinion. We have a difference of position based upon a different set of evidence that we've used, or a different life experience or framework, and we debate the ideas that are important within emergency management back and forth. We understand that maybe some people believe government institutions are of assistance to certain situations. Some believe less so. The end result of all of that is very, very simple, is that we have to get the ability or relearn the ability to accept criticism, to accept other people's points of view of being valid, even when they disagree with you, which is something we do not do well at all now, right? We just don't do it well. And I think it matters. I think it's something that we need to be doing much better at, understanding that debates need to occur. And the more we have a conversation, the less adversarial I'm going to argue that we become. We've lost that ability to debate, and we need to recover that. We need to be able to sit down. Imagine if the United States of America was facing an incredibly important election this fall, and people could actually have a civilized evidence-based discussion about their nation and the direction they think it should go. Imagine if that was possible, right? Unfortunately, if it was, most of the U.S. news networks would be out of business, but it is what it is. Thank you very much for joining us this week at Inside My Canoe Head. We appreciate your continued support. Drop over to our website, www.insidemycanoehead.ca. Everything that you need is about there to contact us directly, to support the show, to look at a bunch of different previous episodes. We're available across all platforms. If you have an idea that you'd like to hear on the podcast, please feel free to send us an email at jeff@preparednesslabs.ca. I get those individually. I answer them myself. Please stay in touch. And if you do nothing else for this show, just share it with somebody else. Tell somebody else we're out there. Appreciate it. Take care. Stay safe.